Hi, my name's Vama and welcome to iDare presents Breakfree, a safe space to unlearn and overcome habits, patterns, situations or relationships that don't serve our well-being or hold us back. Today we have with us Radha and Nitara, psychologists and therapists at iDare, and I'm so excited to welcome you to this podcast, and I feel like this is sort of like my way to get my home back to where we are. So welcome.
Thanks, V. It's really an honor to be here with you.
When I was about 13 or 14 years old, I didn't really understand it was anxiety at that time, but really struggled with anxiety. And that manifested as, holding on to my clothes like this, constantly grinding my teeth or crying incessantly without knowing why. There was just so many things that I would do as a kid, and I would hold on to these different things, and I only much later understood it was anxiety and that I had to deal with it because my body went into being in that state for so long that for the longest time I didn't know how to not be in a state of anxiety. And I wish someone at that time recognized it and was able to tell me that, okay, this is what you have to do, and this is where a therapist can come in. And I really wish I had that, but since I didn't, I want this podcast to be for that 14-year-old Bama, where I ask you all my questions about anxiety and you'll help us through it. So I hope that anybody else going through this knows what's going on. For a layman, for someone who doesn't know anything about mental health, how would you explain anxiety to them?
First of all, let me tell you this. Anxiety is very much part and parcel of our experience as humans. So the goal is, at the outset, let's get this clear, that the goal is not to have an anxiety-free existence. So having said that, all of us are familiar. See, when I look around the room today, how many of us here have experienced anxiety? Invariably, the answer is going to be yes. So most of us feel some level of anxiety almost every day of our lives. You do anything important and anxiety is going to creep up. Now, how are we familiar with this feeling? What does this feeling look like? Well, first of all, it's really a terribly uncomfortable feeling. So it's a negative mood state. When I use the word negative, what I mean is generally it tends to be unpleasant. So right now I can feel my hands literally turning cold as I'm talking to you, V. And I can feel my heart rate racing a bit, the pulse racing a bit. Some of us fidget, some of us, like you said, use various kinds of behaviors to cope with this uncomfortable feeling. And that's how we all get to know anxiety, right? To a 14-year-old, I would say that perhaps you're going to do something important that really matters to you, and the outcome is really important for you, and you're really concerned about how this is going to turn up, how you're going to look in the process. So this is the trick to understanding anxiety. When we are putting ourselves on the line to do anything that's important for us and it really matters to us, anxiety is an emotion that helps us plan and prepare a bit for that, even though the whole process is a bit uncomfortable way. So I hope I made sense, yeah?
Yeah, you did. So what I'm understanding from what you said, a little amount of anxiety is required to push you and motivate you, right?
Absolutely.
Where my confusion is, how does that move away from motivation to actually hurting your well-being or your productivity?
Absolutely. Thanks for that beautiful question. Now, I'm going to step back a little and help us understand anxiety a bit, okay, if that's all right. So besides being a specific diagnosable mental health issue in itself, let's recognize that anxiety is an emotion that is associated with most challenges that we face in the realm of mental health, all right? So when I speak about anxiety as an emotion, most of us tend to experience anxiety as part and parcel of our daily life. Let's say I had a meeting last week for which I wasn't perfectly prepared, or a social event is coming up that's making me feel anxious. Even thinking about some of these things can make me feel anxious. Now, while we recognize that this is very much a part of human experience, for some of us, these fears and worries aren't temporary. So like you said, when does it cross that line? So while an optimal level of anxiety is beneficial and is even inherent part of our experience as humans, in fact, Howard Liddell, the American psychologist, called it the shadow of intelligence. So our ability to plan and prepare in some detail for the future grows from this gnawing feeling that things could go wrong and we had better be prepared for them. So while an optimal level of anxiety helps you prepare for the exam, too much of anxiety might result in you almost giving up on the exam because you can't focus on the questions. So for some of us, these fears and worries aren't temporary, they tend to persist, and we may experience them getting worse over time. And here we enter the realm of anxiety disorders. When the level and intensity of the distress that I'm experiencing is so debilitating me that it interferes with my day-to-day functioning, it starts affecting the quality of my life. And there is an entire spectrum of anxiety disorders, various ways in which this manifests for us with well-defined criteria for each.
Coming from therapy and all of that, I think need to ask y'all, how does the diagnosis of anxiety work? Like for somebody who wants to get diagnosed with anxiety, what do I do?
From my experience, when a client comes in, something that I look at is the kind of impact it has on their well-being. And when I understand that it's interfering with their daily functioning, quality of life, personal relationships, is when I realize that, okay, this probably needs some kind of diagnosis to see what can be done further, in which case I would refer them to a psychiatrist. You've got assessments, but psychiatrists also have particular, like we spoke about the signs and symptoms, right? So the DSM and the ICD, which are manuals that are used to classify, these different disorders. If a client presents with those symptoms, then they can be diagnosed. But that being said, there are also assessments, written assessments that are given to clients, and based on the kind of scores that they get is also how a diagnosis can be done. And Radha can perhaps add on to that.
Of course, beautifully said. Adding on to what Nitara said, I use outcome measures in my therapy work as well. Well, I'm not, qualified to do a risk, assessment and diagnosis. Nevertheless, in my therapeutic practice, I'm using outcome measures. Outcome measures help us to gauge progress and keep track of change through therapy, through the course of therapy.
Okay.
So just like how when you go to a medical doctor, there are certain diagnostic tests that you do at the beginning, right? To see where things stand. And through the course of treatment, you will be repeating those tests to see, is it time to wrap up treatment or am I making progress? In the same way, if I can draw a parallel to the mental health scene, I use outcome measures as a parallel to diagnostic tests. And yes, these scores are not all conclusive. I do make a clinical judgment call in liaison with these numbers. What are these numbers showing me? So again, what are these outcome measures telling us about? What are they, what do they reflect? So one is I use a generic outcome measure on, how is the client's daily functioning looking like.
These are goals or like assessments that you have set in your own structure, or is this something you do with the client?
Well, I always work in collaboration with the client.
Okay.
And again, these are tested for reliability and validity. These are research-backed outcome measures. These are universally used.
So if I'm getting it right, basically y'all, throughout your therapy session, I'm sure maybe your client comes with a problem, and and that problem might be like a quick fix solution or might have a long term, like delving deep and stuff. You'll set your goals and everything for it.
Absolutely.
And then throughout the course of your journey of therapy, you have some outcome measures like how's their quality of life or something else that you will look at to help you see where you are in reaching that goal.
And
correct?
Yes, and if I may add on to that, when I look at the score, there is a clinical cutoff as well. So because we are speaking about assessment and diagnosis, right? So I myself can see as a clinician, is it in the clinical range? Does it deserve, clinical attention? Perhaps I can then start a conversation with the client. Again, as I told you, the numbers are not all conclusive, right? You make a clinical judgment call in maybe in liaison with everything else, that all the work that you do in the therapy sessions as well. So again, you take this decision in collaboration with the client. Like Nitara said, much of an impact do the anxiety levels have on the client's quality of life? Does it impede their journey towards their goals, or does it make just daily life really, really difficult and troublesome for them? So you take a clinical judgment call based on this, and you can have a conversation around, would you like to have a diagnosis done, or would you like to have assessment done? Again, I'm not a fan of saying categorically that this is going to work for you and only medication and only therapy, but I'm a fan of trusting the process first of all, surrendering to the process, see how it goes, and then taking decisions along the way. Calibrating the choices that we make in accordance with the impact that therapy is having on the client, or let's say the client is already on medication and they are in therapy, seeing what the impact of medication is on their current life. So let's take a collaborative decision there.
That's really beautiful, and I think I want to a little bit of what you said, right? It's very similar to what my therapist does with me, and I have been going to my therapist I think since I was 17 years old or 18 years old, I would say, on and off, obviously. When you feel better, you're like, acha, I can manage, why do I need to go? And then it comes back to you saying, nobody. But I feel like now I'm in that space, and this is something that what was the difference between that time when I felt like, nah buddy, now you're good, versus now of me being like, you know what, I think I can be okay, is that previously it was my own judgment versus now it was a collaborative decision, and we work towards this.
Absolutely.
With my therapist.
Absolutely.
Eventually the goal with therapy is for you to be able to learn how to manage your life so well that you don't need your therapist on an everyday basis anymore.
Yes.
Which is where I feel like my therapist has in so many years handholded me and brought me here, where now I go back to him once a month, where I'm able to be like, okay, you know what, this happened. And one of the sessions I had, and I want to say, it was the most beautiful thing. I had an inner child like healing moment which just came out of nowhere for me. I was reading a book and then I watched something and then it all came gushing to me, okay? And I just had a therapy session to brief my therapist about my inner child moment, and that whole session, which was 1 hour long, we just celebrated. And it was so beautiful. And I just feel like if you over time build that relationship with your therapist and that collaboration, like you said, what can come out of that relationship is, the quality of your life, the quality of how now I build safer. So in therapy, I learned how to build a safe relationship. And now I can mimic that in other places, not just with myself, but with other people.
Absolutely.
Right? So what you learn in the therapy room can really easily, will be translated to your life.
Yes.
And I think in that way, therapy can do wonders. At least now I feel where using the word, oh my God, I have anxiety has become such a colloquially easy sentence to use, whereas that differentiation of what an anxiety disorder looks like versus experiencing anxiety as an emotion is not made very clearly. And I think you put it very beautifully about how they're different. What I also want to understand, maybe Nitara, you can shed some light on that, is how is anxiety different from fear? Because when I was a kid, because I was constantly in that zone, everyone thought that she's just a very, I heard the word scary boo, she's always so scared, things like that, oh my God, she's weak, she's very easily scared and stuff like that. So how do you differentiate anxiety to fear?
Anxiety is usually a perceived threat. So there might not actually be a threat, but you sense that potentially there could be some danger. But that being said, some amount of anxiety is also healthy because it's a way of alerting the body to sort of be aware of your surroundings. That as compared to fear, which is that there is an actual threat. So say, for example, you're out at night and it's dark and you're alone. You're bound to feel a little fearful, right? And that fear is normal. With anxiety, again, the healthy anxiety is always good, but there comes a point when we start overthinking on a particular perceived threat. So I guess as a 14-year-old, the way to explain that to a child especially would be to understand that sometimes the fear is okay because everybody feels the fear to a certain extent. And everybody also feels the anxiety to a certain extent. But like Radha said, When the anxiety starts getting out of hand is when you realize that it's affecting your daily functioning. So quality of life, your personal relationships, work, school, it starts to show up in those places. So that's how you differentiate the two.
Okay, that's very interesting. And if you could also tell me what's the difference between anxiety and panic attacks? Because I feel like that is also something that, is easily confusable.
So with panic and panic attacks in specific, the feeling is like life is going to end. So it's a very impending sense of doom that you start to feel. Feels like a heart attack is how it's been described. So there's this very heavy feeling in your chest. Usually with panic attacks, the trigger is not identifiable. So there perhaps might have been a trigger before someone experiences the panic attack, but they're unlikely to be able to figure out what the trigger is. With anxiety, when you go and trace back to what you were feeling before when you started to feel those intense emotions, you're likely to be able to pinpoint on something that might have set that attack off.
So I know a lot of different people have different symptoms of anxiety, and I know what could be a symptom for me might not be the same symptom for somebody else, right?
Yeah.
Whether that is like sweaty palms or breathing heavily or like a strange gut. So I also want to understand what are some symptoms of anxiety, and if I'm not wrong, there are different types of anxiety. So if
Yes.
y'all can talk a little bit about that, I'd love that.
Absolutely. So, as I mentioned earlier, there is an entire spectrum of ways in which we tend to experience anxiety or how it manifests for each of us. Some of us may have a generalized feeling of anxiety where you have persistent worries or anxious feelings about a number of concerns, about your career, about your work, or just a pervading general sense that
Like a spiral, like a thought spiral that you're going
absolutely,
into.
and also about a range of things, right? So you can be, anxious about, let's say, how long is it going to get me through the traffic to my workplace? What's going to happen at work? Will I be able to handle that? And after that, will I be able to handle my personal commitments? And so it goes on. So like you said, it's a spiral and a loop, and it goes on forever, right? So, so like I said, it can be a pervading sense of something bad is going to happen. Yeah. So, like some of the symptoms you mentioned, I would also like to add, some of us have difficulty focusing. Some of us tend to procrastinate because you tend to see it as a character flaw that I'm not able to focus on my tasks. What's wrong with me? There must be something inherently wrong with me, right? Some of us have sleep issues or generally feeling on edge all the time. Now, some of us have panic attacks, like you asked earlier.
Just adding on to what Radha said, some of the uncommon signs of anxiety that a lot of us don't catch on to are also like a constant need for reassurance. So say for example, you're in a workplace and you're working on a project, there's always a need to either go to your co-worker or go to your manager and seek that kind of reassurance. And sometimes we live our lives for the longest time wondering why we're seeking that reassurance. It's coming from a place of anxiety. And these are symptoms of what we call high functioning anxiety. So the need to constantly be perfect with regard to what you're doing, because that gives you a sense of control. And when you have that sense of control, like you spoke about, you feel like things are certain. So when the uncertainty angle is removed, you have that clarity. Another very uncommon sign of anxiety that we don't catch on to is also people pleasing. As a way to, again, feel like you've got control of a situation. And I also really like that you spoke about the gut being involved, because from my experience, you have a lot of clients who come in and they've come in because they've gone to a general physician who's said that you've got IBS, irritable bowel syndrome. So they come in for therapy, letting us know that they've been referred by a GP. So there's not enough awareness on IBS stemming from anxiety. And so then they come in, and that's when you also start working on anxiety. So even the gut has a very important role to play with anxiety, and I think there needs to be more awareness about that as well.
Over time, you still have flashbacks and you're still anxious and your body's holding on to that trauma.
Yes.
Is it possible somewhere, is that a sign of anxiety? I don't know. I'm just wondering, to feel like I don't know what is going to happen the next day. So if today I'm in a good mood and today everything's going okay, then I want to hold on to it and keep that control for it as much as possible. And if something goes wrong, then I just go like, oh my God, it feels like it might be something that might not even be that big a deal. But in my head, it feels like, oh my God, like, it's done, it's over.
Yes.
Because for me, I put so much importance on that single day because I didn't know how the next day was going to go.
Yes.
Is that something that's
absolutely?
Like also
and let me tell you this, something that I would like to add to your question on what's the difference between fear and anxiety. Let's recognize that anxiety is a future-oriented mood state, whereas fear can also be about the present, right? And most often it tends to be about the present, whereas anxiety is a future-oriented mood state. It's always about what's going to happen. Will I do this well? Right? So to answer your question, B, we humans like to have a semblance of control. Uncertainty freaks us out as a race. So we try ways and means, everything in my control to maintain a semblance of control, either within me. So as I mentioned, rituals. Now I'm using an extreme example. Let's say I have obsessive thoughts and I'm not able to stop them. Obviously, you're not going to be able to control them. The very thing that you control is going to come back with double force. We all know that. So how do I still cope with it? I maintain a semblance of control by engaging in rituals. I keep doing things, like you said, in the present to help me convince myself that all is well. But, we both know, three of us know that that pattern is not serving us well, that this is still an unhealthy pattern. I'm still aware of it, but I'm ignorant of how can I get out of the loop, because I have a semblance of control. It keeps the loop, fear keeps the loop in place, but unless and until I, perhaps attend a therapy session, or, the distress really hits the roof and I'm compelled to do something drastic, I'm not going to get to know of what kind of interventions can really be effective. So
I also want to know a little bit more on what are the other types of anxiety that there are. Like, I know there's relationship anxiety, there's social anxiety. Can you all tell me a little bit more about that?
So, to start off with, like you said, high functioning anxiety, a very common type of anxiety that exists, and again, we don't catch on to it because, like the name suggests, high functioning, where an individual is able to go on with their daily life, not constantly focusing on some of these symptoms that they're probably going through. So, we've all got that coworker where they're walking into office and they look like they've, got everything together, and they're in at office early and their presentations look great and they're really confident. And then maybe one day you have a conversation with them and they're telling you about their extreme anxiety and you're so shocked, right? Because you never thought that person could have anxiety. And that's the essence of high functioning anxiety. It's essentially you're able to do everything that you'd usually do, but you don't see that underconfidence, you don't see those trembly hands, you don't see them sweating. And so then you just feel like, oh, like anxiety is something that I'm supposed to see in someone else. But unfortunately, that's not the case.
Wherever your heart lies, there is bound to be some amount of anxiety. Let me say that.
Oh, Radha, why are you doing this to me?
In the sense, if something really matters to me and the outcome is important for me, there is no way you're going to go about it without experiencing anxiety, because you care about it. So let's say that one way of
Okay, wait, before that. So if I stop feeling anxious about something, does that mean I don't care about it?
Smart question, V. Smart question. Well, you get better at it. So let's say that jumping off cliffs, of parachutes, or paragliding is something that I love. Let's say the first 10 times I have a knotty stomach, I have sweaty palms and things like that. And slowly when I start seeing myself enjoying the process, I'm having fun. So I slowly get better at managing anxiety. It doesn't mean that my heart still won't race when I'm walking to the cliff, when I'm talking to those instructors there, when they're, strapping those things on my body. Of course, I'm going to feel anxious.
So like you said, I think what I'm taking from there is, it doesn't, once you start feeling better or you start managing better and you feel safer in either that relationship or with the group of friends you have, then that anxiety, even though it is there, you've learned to manage it well, and So it doesn't mean you don't care anymore. It just means that you're in a safer environment and you've learned to manage it, correct?
Or you've created a safe space within yourself.
Oh, wow, yeah.
You've created a safe space within yourself. You are feeling comfortable in your skin. You're no longer viewing it as a threat. I love this I love this Elizabeth Gilbert's video.
Okay.
It's a video on fear, okay? But I would relate it to anxiety as well. So Elizabeth Gilbert, the author of Eat, Pray, Love, as you know, she speaks about a minivan. You're riding a minivan and you're having all these emotions sitting in your back seat. You have fear, you have anxiety, you have frustration, you have disappointment. You're letting them into your minivan. You're telling them, please, welcome, all of you jump in, have a seat. But I'm not going to let you adjust the temperature. I'm not going to let you change the radio music. I'm not going to let you choose the channel. And I'm never going to allow you to sit at the wheel. I felt that that's a beautiful image that all of us can have in mind. Let all these emotions have a friendly, have a very welcoming space within yourself. But you're telling yourself that, first of all, they're not a threat to me. They're just my fellow passengers. And they're going to be part of my ride nevertheless. Because once you shut out one emotion, you're shutting out the entire pipeline. All emotions come through the same pipeline. When I shut out fear, anxiety, jealousy, disappointment, I'm going to blunt out my ability to experience life. Because as you know, for you to experience life in its full glory and beauty, you need to be able to be accepting and experiencing all the myriad kinds of emotions. So the goal is not to shut out or blunt out one particular feeling such as anxiety. Yeah. So the goal is how can I learn to manage it better? If I were to add something, I would add this way. Many of us feel extremely anxious in social situations. This makes it really hard for some of us to interact with others in public, or I might worry for days and months before a social event. So what's happening there is, I've heard clients often say this to me, and this includes myself as a person, that what I'm fearing is, what if they catch me doing those things when I'm really anxious and fidgety? It's about judgment, that fear of judgment. How will I be perceived? Will they notice my shivering hands and my stuttering? Some of us tend to stutter and stammer as well, struggle with various kinds of difficulties, and all this gets exacerbated when you are in the public gaze, so it becomes all the more difficult.
You know how people block out emotions because they don't know how to cope with it, and obviously they learn doing it very early on when they don't know any better, right? And that just becomes a way of life, and that is their coping mechanism. What are some other coping mechanisms you all have seen between people? I know mine is, I'm sure anybody who knows me has seen me do this, right? Where if I'm anxious in a situation, this is just how I'm soothing myself in that situation to feel better. I still do what I have to do, but I mean, I have my buddy with me. So what are some other coping mechanisms that you all know?
That's a very nice question, and the coping part of anxiety becomes extremely important. And before we get into that, I think it's important for us to be able to differentiate the healthy coping mechanisms from the unhealthy coping mechanisms. So if we were to speak a little bit about the unhealthy coping mechanisms, from my experience, one of the most common coping mechanisms that I've seen, especially with regard to anxiety, is avoidance. So back when I was in school, every time I had to give a presentation, I would try my best to avoid doing it, until the end when I had no choice. And of course, once I did the presentation, when I knew that everything went well, it was different. But there's so much avoidance that I've seen clients engage in, the smallest of things, from avoiding going to that party or even avoiding going to the store, for example. I also remember back when I was in college, I had a friend who would find it extremely hard to go to the food counter and say, this is what I want. So sometimes it's things as small as that, and we feel that when we're going ahead and doing that for our friend, we're helping them, but what we're actually doing is just sort of adding to that avoidance mechanism. So avoidance being one. Substance abuse, substance dependence through alcohol, drugs, where you feel like you want to engage in that moment and sort of temporarily block that feeling. Like you spoke about suppressing feelings, right? So that's also something that happens. And sometimes these things happen very unconsciously. Suppression is very common with regard to trauma, for example.
Now, if I may slightly shift gears and speak about how do we make this transition from unhealthy to healthy? Is that okay, Vi?
Yeah, of course,
So,
please.
we often tend to see this as a character flaw, or something to do with my willpower, when in fact there's a lot of physiology at work here, right? Now, today we have a biopsychosocial model for mental health conditions. It's not only about you, but it's also the environment that you're part of and you have to deal with constantly, both familial and social. So when I speak about interventions, it starts with awareness. Before we even dive into interventions, I'm going to reiterate something that I said earlier, and I can't stress this more. The goal is not to have an anxiety-free existence. At the same time, how are my anxiety levels affecting the overall quality of my life, like Nitara said? Or does this limit me or prevent me from doing things that I would like to pursue? A good place to start could be observing what are those situations in my daily life, in my day-to-day routine, where I tend to feel anxious? What does my experience of anxiety look like? How do I tend to behave or react when I'm anxious? Number two, let's say I have used certain coping mechanisms for a long time now, for years now, and I have reacted typically to situations a certain way for a long time now. It's natural that the same neuronal pathways are going to get fired and triggered in the brain when I face a similar situation. So, habits. It's only about habits. If I have done repeatedly something traditionally over time, again and again and again, the brain recognizes that this is something that is going to serve you. The brain doesn't differentiate between good and bad. There is no morality involved here. Is it right or wrong? No. The brain is all about making our lives easier and providing shortcuts, right? So if I've traditionally coped with, let's say, exams or public speaking, getting onto the stage, or even meeting a stranger, if I've traditionally coped with it with anxiety, the same neuronal pathways that are associated with these habits and coping mechanisms are going to get fired because of constant use. They are in place in the brain after all. We often tend to look at this as a character flaw or something wrong with me, when in fact it's all about physiology. So the same neuronal circuits are going to fire up and get triggered when you are facing a similar situation. Trust me, most of our responses are so automatic and unconscious. Hence, awareness is the first step. Number two, I see that anxiety is the tip of the iceberg. There often tend to be deeper underlying issues that predispose us towards this condition, at least for most of us. So it goes without saying that addressing these concerns is crucial for anxiety management. And finally, if I may add a bit about, the key to this also lies in working on emotional regulation. Most of us struggle with regulating our emotions. It goes without saying that working in this realm, working on your capability to manage emotions is crucial for the management of anxiety as well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That is so beautifully put. I mean, that differentiation, that it's not your coping mechanism is not a character flaw, but it's just your brain is so used to doing that.
Absolutely.
And if it's used to doing something, it's also possible to change that, right?
Yes.
And to train your brain to
Yes.
learn a healthier coping mechanism. And that brings me to another question, which is there hope for people like us with anxiety? And this is truly my 15-year-old wondering that will I ever feel better? Or will this ever change or end, right?
Yes.
And yeah.
Absolutely. The answer is yes, we. Absolutely. So, let me speak about the way forward, what can help. We often tend to take mental health for granted. We tend to act only in an emergency. Instead, there are simple daily practices that you can follow that can be helpful. Number one, like I said, awareness. Paying attention to your body cues in anxiety-inducing situations. Paying attention to your breathing, for instance. Most often, our breath tends to become shallow or rapid when anxious. Rhythmic breathing has been proven to be effective in anxiety management, number one. Number two, any kind of mindfulness-based technique that kind of helps you calm down, ground yourself in the present, bring your focus back to the present helps. Number 3, cramming up, and I see this very, often in many of our lives. If cramming up too many things in your daily routine is causing too much of anxiety, perhaps taking a step back, taking some time to plan, prioritize, and schedule. So basically, simplify. If you can remember one word, simplify. That can help in anxiety management. And to add on, positive emotional experiences. Research shows us again and again that positive emotions have a knock-on effect. When we engage in positive emotions, when we experience positive emotions like gratitude, contentment, interest, joy, even for fleeting moments, it enhances our ability to have a sense of mastery or control over our circumstances. So setting aside some time every day for rest, for relaxation, something that brings you pleasure and joy. Regular practice of relaxation techniques, support systems, all of this have a significant role in anxiety management. And finally, I know I'm going to enter a new realm or field of topic of conversation. All of us know pharmacotherapy. Pharmacological treatment is a line of treatment that's very popular for anxiety management. But today we have enough scientific evidence that proves the efficacy of psychotherapy as well.
Medication helps, and you're saying medication and therapy help hand in hand. What do you all believe?
So, of course, both are equally important. However, with the kind of stigma around medication, in my personal experience, I've had a lot of clients who are not okay taking medication, largely because I see a lot of young adults, and having to go to your parent and say, oh, I've got to take medication is not very well received. But research shows that because sometimes psychotherapy is not always enough, right? Because a large part of the anxiety is also biological. Yes, of course, your past experiences also do play a role in an individual developing anxiety. But like Radha also mentioned, there's a lot of neurotransmitters that are involved, and sometimes having a little less of a particular neurotransmitter does put you at a risk of developing anxiety. So how do you now work towards increasing that particular neurotransmitter without pharmacotherapy? And that's where pharmacotherapy becomes important. But that being said, a lot of clients are sort of encouraged and recommended to do both if that's what benefits them. But at the end of the day, it's also personal. It doesn't go to say that psychotherapy alone does not give you any kind of progress. If a client comes in and if they decide that my way out of this is only going to be psychotherapy, then sure, you can go ahead, you can try. And if the therapist and the client then feel like psychotherapy alone is not working, that's when we refer them to psychiatrists for medication.
Let's also acknowledge that the jury is still out there. Some of us are still on the fence, whether it's researchers who are doing their bit of research, pharmaceutical companies doing their work, and the general public, we who are at the receiving end of all this information and the outcomes of research. So research is going to evolve with us as varied as human beings and us having varied spectrum of experiences. But having said that, this has to looked at, strictly on a case-by-case basis. Now, there can be, few of us who have tried medication for some time, and in the process, maybe we develop, we experience side effects. That itself becomes a hindrance for me, or it becomes a problem to manage. Some of us might have ventured into therapy. And here I hope I can add a bit about adherence to therapy. Most often I've seen that, yes, some of us are willing to take that route, but let's say I take 1 or 2 sessions, I find a bit of relief, and then I decide to put an end. So, therapy is most beneficial when you can attend sessions fairly regularly, complete the work that you have started, yeah, and regarding termination of therapy or ending therapy, let that be a collaborative decision that you take along with your psychiatrist, you take along with your therapist. And again, if I can take a step back, it's important to recognize when things start becoming unmanageable for me, if I can simply put it that way. yes, I've tried all these interventions. I've tried daily practices. I listen to podcasts, I listen to my friends, I listen to my family, I observe people doing various kinds of things, and I'm trying to, try out all these measures in my life. But let's say I've tried all of them out, and still I find that this is something that is beyond the scope of my management. That's where I would say, draw the line. It's time for you to consider seeking professional help, whether in the form of assessment and diagnosis, like you mentioned, from a medically trained professional, and also and/or seeking help from a therapist as well. And as you embark on this journey, you're going to find that permutation combination that's going to suit you well.
Got it.
Right?
Yeah.
But let's not be self-assumed, self-proclaimed experts here. Let's
sure.
leave it to the experts. Let's work in liaison with experts, and let's understand, a bit of what's happening with me, what kind of interventions can personally work for me in liaison with these experts, and probably then plan the way ahead. Yeah?
Yeah, I think that's very nicely put. And I think as a client or as somebody, who like experiences anxiety, I also need to somewhere know that if my coping mechanisms are not working,
Yes.
then I do need to seek help. And there's nothing wrong with seeking help, right?
Yes.
I think also, just talking on to something that you said, I know this is true for someone very close to me, which was, so they were on anxiety medication, and they were on anxiety medication for a short period until it was very unmanageable for them, right? And so they were on medication for that time, but they continued with psychotherapy because what their therapist said, which was so beautiful, which is this medication will take you to baseline where you can feel better, so you can actually do the work.
Absolutely.
And then starts your work where you are preparing yourself to be okay without the medication. And obviously there will be bumps in road,
Yes.
like in the road as we go along.
Yes.
But I think that was so beautifully put, and that was what a collaborative journey of a therapist and a client looked like.
Absolutely.
Because that's what was suiting her.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think that was really nice, nice way to put it, that it has to be a collaborative journey.
Yes.
A lot of times we believe that I'm not, and I've heard so many people say this, right? Hey, I'm not that bad, yeah. I'll try it if I really need to try it. Chumma, why go into all of this?
Yes.
I'll see what I can do.
Yes.
And then I continue with my unhealthy coping mechanisms
Yes.
until it all just comes falling down. And then it's so much harder to manage.
Yes.
And I just wish that we knew that you can go to therapy even when things are not the worst.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Even I know people who come to therapy when nothing is wrong, just to grow.
Absolutely.
People go to therapy for different reasons, and I think somewhere realizing that therapy is not just in that worst situation is also breaking the stigma around it.
Absolutely.
So we spoke a lot about unhealthy coping mechanisms. I want to understand what are some healthy coping mechanisms.
So like Radha initially mentioned awareness, right? I think the first step to a healthy coping mechanism starts with being aware of how you're coping. And when you're able to recognize that this coping mechanism isn't serving you, it isn't benefiting you to get to your goal, is when you then realize that you need to switch to a healthy coping mechanism, right? Now, again, this can really differ based on what suits a client, but some of the more common ones are meditation, for example, mindfulness. Deep breathing is something that's very beneficial. So when Radha spoke about, the neural pathways that exist, something else that happens with anxiety is that our body goes into our nervous system, goes into dysregulation, and then we need to bring our nervous system back to equilibrium, right? And the way for us to do that would be to sort of regulate it. And one of the, I remember reading a post which said that deep breathing is your nervous system's love language, and not enough emphasis
I remember that today.
there's not enough emphasis on breathing, because I have a lot of clients, and I know that when you tell a client to regulate their nervous system, engage in deep breathing, it sounds bizarre because they feel like, I'm here, I've got so many concerns I want to speak about, and all you can say is engage in breathing. But the wonders that it does, and I've had so many clients who've come back and said that in that moment breathing has really helped me. So that's also something that you sort of inculcate into your mindfulness practices and your meditation practices. And of course, just encouraging, people around you, your friends, to go in for therapy, because a lot of times the anxiety, like Radha also spoke about, is very deep-seated. So it's not about what you're experiencing at the surface level. So you've often got to go below the iceberg, right? What exists below that anxiety would be some of the other healthy mechanisms, social support, because again, another unhealthy mechanism is isolating yourself. So then stepping out of your comfort zone, trying to build a network where you've got people to fall back on, self-care, for example, your hobbies, physical exercise, because again, physical exercise helps with regulating the nervous system. So these are a couple of healthy coping mechanisms that one can fall back on.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of the WHO's beautiful definition of health and well-being, which says health is not just the absence of illness, it's your ability to thrive. It's not just about surviving. We humans have somehow managed to convince ourselves that as long as I have food, clothing, shelter, a hefty bank balance, and a partner in place, everything is set. But let's not forget that it takes a lot more for us to thrive as a race, right? So having said that, if I can add, of course, Nitara has already done a thorough job of covering everything, but if I can squeeze a bit more out of that lemon, I would add two things, perhaps. When we look at physical activity, when there is this pressure on looking good and looking fit, let's also recognize that we are as varied as human beings, and some of us don't even embark on the journey of physical health and fitness because we feel that, oh my God, I can't go to the gym, or yoga doesn't suit me. Let's first of all take some time to understand, is there a kind of physical activity that helps me? The reason I'm saying this is everything feeds into the anxiety picture. The diet that you follow daily, am I fueling myself for my energy needs? Am I doing the basics? A car can't run on an empty tank, as you know. So taking care of just basic things with regard to diet. Again, I'm not talking about fancy diets. Do I need to add a bit more carbohydrate, a bit more healthy fat, a bit more protein, a bit more fresh fruit or vegetable, or just more water? This cannot be stressed more. Number two, can I get out of four walls at least for 10 to 20 minutes? This is I plead with my clients. Let's not go for I shall gym perfectly, for 45 minutes. Yes, dear, you will get to that goal. But for now, can you step out of your four walls at least for 10 to 20 minutes? Can you take it as a prescription? We speak about vitamin D deficiency a lot in our culture today, right? In our conversations today. How many of us have even seen the morning sun or, in the hustle and bustle? Do we stop and enjoy the setting sun? I believe it's the grandest spectacle that happens every day. Yet none of us are there to witness it. So while, of course, I took a romantic journey there, but what I was trying to say is, step out of the four walls. Take it as a prescription, at least for 10 to 20 minutes a day with your phone on silent mode. This allows you to connect with the calm and peace that is already within you. And, again, this is the most productive time because it allows for new ideas and insights to come up as well. So physical activity, add in any kind of activity that suits you. It can be a stroll around your apartment complex or around your office space, at least for 10 to 20 minutes. Take care of your diet. Pay enough attention to feeding yourself at least the basic nutrition that you need to meet your energy needs. And then, like Nitara mentioned, support systems, right? Again, we look for perfection there. Am I having the perfect partner? Am I having the perfect friendship? Excuse me, have you said hello to the colleague who's sitting right next to you on the sofa? Or have you,
Hi, Radha.
Hi, V, it's nice to catch up once in a while. I'm just saying, okay? Yes, forgive me.
I'd just like to add on to what Radha said when, she spoke about the simple things. It's also important for us to set realistic goals with our clients. So it's not about going out there and running for 30 minutes, but it's something as small as, just taking a stroll around your apartment. So each time we're talking about coping mechanisms, it's important for us to emphasize on how these goals need to be something that's feasible for our clients to do. So trying to ensure that they're realistic.
Absolutely.
And I think also the fact that, that one day if you don't do it, it's okay.
It's okay.
Which
Yeah.
is something which is very easy, which is, I think, which is very me, is, oh, I was on like a 5-day streak of working out. 6 days, something happened. I was too busy at work, or I was just really low, so I didn't get myself to move. 7th day, I'm like, oh man, I didn't do it yesterday. What's the point? I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
Gone, over.
Yeah.
But I think that it's okay if I didn't do it one day. Maybe that day,
Absolutely.
like, I didn't feel like it, and that's fine. That doesn't mean my progress for those last 5 days is over, right?
Correct.
And I can continue from there. I can take it from where I left off. And I think that's which is very important also when you all set realistic goals for us as clients, but we also need to somewhere be kind to ourselves to know that we are sometimes going to not even do those realistic goals, and that's okay, and we'll come back to it.
And I think you opened up a beautiful door for me to probably, get in and talk a little about it. Self-compassion, self-acceptance. But let's not forget that anxiety also, for most of us, anxiety also stems from the really high, hard expectations, unrealistic. I love what Nitara said, let's keep it real. So for most of us, anxiety also stems from the really hard bullshit, if I may use the word, expectations that we set for ourselves. I mean, would you set it for your child or your best friend? No. You're being the biggest bully on the planet. So, so ask yourself, is it really fair to hold me to such a high bar that I can't even breathe through the day? If I have managed to get up from bed, have a decent breakfast, smile at myself in the mirror, accepted that bulge in my tummy or that bulge somewhere else that I'm seeing, and still know that yes, I'm working towards it, I'm working on it, all is well, the world is not going to end. Yes, there is a work-related deadline that's coming up, there is an email that's right there waiting on my laptop, but can I also acknowledge that all of us are in this together as a race? Perhaps taking a step back and taking perspective, that recognize that, first of all, I'm not alone in this. I need not be alone in this. When this gets too difficult for me to manage, there are reliable sources of support that we can go to, like a safe therapy space, for instance, or an organization that has trained, trustworthy, reliable professionals, right? So I can seek help. And I love that line that you say, as my CEO, you say it in your speeches often, and I'm like, I gush and I have goosebumps when you say this. You say that, seeking help is a sign that you're not ready to give up yet.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most beautiful lines I've ever heard. First of all, let's not be hard on ourselves, for our hesitancy to approach therapy. Most of us are first-timers in our families. To even think about, look at mental health a certain way, prioritize mental health. So let's not be hard on ourselves, for not taking to therapy like a fish takes to water. No, sorry. It's very much an evolving scene, but we are there. We are there, yes. So, and I truly believe that, okay, I'm slightly venturing out. As a developing nation, we forget that a key currency for our productivity, for everything that we want to do as citizens, as a country, the currency also is mental health. And how long can we go on ignoring that currency, right?
It's beautiful.
So let's pay attention to that as well. If we want to get in all the accolades as a nation, if we want to get in, all the achievements that we aspire for.
I want to now come towards the end of today's podcast, and I think, a lot of what you guys said, for me was also in a weird way. While we started off, for me, as it was like a start where it's like this 15-year-old girl asking you all questions that she wanted at that time. Through the journey of the conversation, and I don't know how it sounds, but in my head, it was also like, oh my God, look at the progress you've made. For myself.
Absolutely.
A lot of like the healthy
Absolutely.
coping mechanisms you all said,
Yes.
or the things you all said about therapy,
Yes.
I feel like I did that, and I'm here today sitting with you all doing something I'm super anxious to do, which is like sit and talk to people in front of a camera, but I'm here doing it, and I don't think I'm so like anxious about it, or like that anxiety is not eating me up to the point that I can't do it. And I also want to pat myself on the back for that, and to my entire support system for doing that, because
Absolutely.
I know that the journey is not very easy, but Yeah, there's hope, yeah.
There's hope and you're not alone.
Yeah, exactly. You're not alone, which is what we say to everyone, as creepy as it sounds. You're not alone in this journey.
You don't have
I mean,
to be.
True.
there's so many people here for you, and iDare is here for you in so many ways, right? Coming to that, we always ask our guests, what is your iDare moment? Which is basically some time in your life where, you know, you felt the odds were against you, or where it took immense courage to do something that, you know, and that could really be for one day just waking up when you felt like, yeah, today it just feels like the end, I can't do it. That could be your iDare moment, or it could be anything else. But I want to know what your iDare moment was.
My iDare moment would actually just be choosing the career that I'm in, going against all odds and deciding that this is something that I wanted to do, considering you know, when we speak about stigma, it's not just about stigma for people seeking help, but it's also about people sort of getting into the field and just, you know, going against all odds and deciding that this is something that I want to do for the rest of my life, and to still wake up every morning and know that this is something that I know I will do for the rest of my life and choose it over and over again has been my iDare moment. And I think throughout this journey, and I've been studying it for about 7 years now and been working for about 2, I think my iDare moment is essentially just me being my own biggest cheerleader.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
that.
Yes, that's so beautiful. And thank you. It's a privilege to be a part of your journey as well.
Same here.
So, yeah. So,
Radha, you?
Thank you. Thanks, V, for that beautiful question. You know, I teared up a bit when I traced it back. So, if I were to trace back, trace the journey back, I think it would start with a couple of sessions I had with a social worker in a psychiatric hospital about 15 years ago when I was admitted for mental health issues. But you know, I stepped out of the hospital the very next day. I realized that, you know, there was another kind of help that I needed, to be very honest. But frankly speaking, the challenges that I faced in finding the right kind of help led to my training as a mental health professional. I was a computer science teacher back then, you know, but then that led to my training, that social worker, and I, in a way, I feel that every day I'm paying her forward, you know, paying forward what she gave me, you know, the life that she, I know I'm romanticizing this a bit, but it's true. You know, I decided to come back to life literally and in every which way because of that couple of sessions I had with the social worker. So coming back to, you know, what you asked, the challenges that I faced myself in finding that reliable professional, that right kind of support led to my training as a mental health professional myself. And today I'm bursting with pride, with joy, with privilege when I say that I'm associated with UV and your remarkable journey. And that beautiful thing that you started called iDare, where I get to go to every day and I get to experience this. And you know, 3 things that stand out for me as part of our iDare journey is, one, I'm really privileged to be associated with an organization that strives to make mental health services accessible, affordable for all. Number 2, address the stigma that is still prevalent about seeking help, and also raising awareness. We strive to raise awareness also about prioritizing, making mental health a priority. I cannot stress this more. Yeah. Thank you, V, for the privilege.
Thank you, Radha. And honestly, I want to also come back to a little bit about your journey, right? Where I know this was supposed to be the end of the podcast, but I don't want to go without saying this, which is that when you came and when you joined iDare, I knew a little bit about your journey, and over time we got to know each other and I understood more of your journey. I understood where you came from, but I've also seen you grow so much, and I know you know that.
Yes.
From the first day to today, sitting here and doing this podcast, and I'm so proud of you for it. And I know you were super nervous and you did it. So I'm so happy for all of us, like being here with each other, doing things that, you know, that might not seem very easy and natural to us, but still doing it because we got to show up, right?
Absolutely.
And yeah, so on that note, I want to end today and today's podcast. It's been a wonderful conversation. In a weird way, it's been very healing for me. So I really, really want to thank you all, and I hope everyone who's listening to this has found something in here that has really resonated with them, or that's something that they will take back and will help them or someone they know at some point in their life. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope to see you all and hope to interact with you all in some way or the other really soon. Thank you.